This is Risky Women Radio, a show to connect, celebrate and champion women in risk, regulation and compliance, sharing insight and perspective from the most influential members of our global Risky Women network on the latest developments we need to think about, the challenges we should all talk more about, and the innovation we are most excited about in governance, risk and compliance. Bringing together the hundreds of senior women professionals already connected with a new emerging group of leading women and men. I'm Kimberly Cole, your Chief Risky Woman. This episode is brought to you by our founding sponsor, Refinitiv. Refinitiv serves more than 40,000 institutions in over 190 countries. Refinitiv provides information, insights and technology that drive innovation and performance in global financial markets. Refinitiv enables the financial community to trade smarter and faster, overcome regulatory challenges, and scale intelligently. Welcome to Risky Women Radio. Today's Risky Woman is Sarah Hayes. Sarah is Head of Department, Lending and Intermediaries Authorisations at the Financial Conduct Authority here in London. Welcome, Sarah.
Hello.
Great to have you here. Just a quick intro as to Sarah before we let her tell her career journey and story. Sarah is a senior executive with a strong track record for strategic leadership and proposition ownership in financial markets and successfully delivering complex change programs across global organisations. Sarah is known for doing the right thing and for getting things done. So great to have you here today, Sarah. Let's start with the Financial Conduct Authority and share us briefly around what the Financial Conduct Authority does and is responsible for, and then your area within the FCA.
So the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, is the regulator of the UK financial system. So we oversee about 60,000 firms. And we put rules in place about how firms operate so the interests of consumers are protected and the financial markets work well. And it covers the full range. So we are the gateway for firms and individuals wanting to operate. We then oversee them. And if they don't follow our rules, we take action to protect consumers. And the division that I work in, Authorisations, is at the front end of that. So we assess the applications from new firms and individuals who want to become regulated, and then also from existing regulated firms who are applying to change the permissions under which they operate.
So that sounds like a very broad role and a very important role. Conduct comes up a lot in the financial markets and is very important. So obviously you've got protecting consumers, looking at the financial markets, but also looking at competition. Big role, lots of different areas that both the FCA covers and also your department. So tell us a bit more about what your department is responsible for.
So it's responsible for authorising firms and individuals in the consumer credit market and in retail intermediaries. And what that actually covers is all companies that are looking to offer us any form of debt services. In the lending side, it's anything from pawnbrokers to peer-to-peer through to the high-cost credit market. And then I've got, on the retail side, I've got financial advisors through to insurance intermediaries. So it's a very wide range. When you look at it, you actually say, well, they have the opportunity, if incorrect, to significantly harm customers because we look after the vulnerable customers where potentially it's the only way they can access money. And on the other side, it also involves people with their life savings and pensions. And so it's really important that firms that are authorised can actually meet the rules that we've set out for them to do.
Excellent. So protecting consumers, protecting financial markets, and also then looking at competition. And it's given the changes in the way the financial markets and the new innovations that are happening, I imagine it's continually changing and no wonder you said there's sort of tricky applications that are coming through. So tell us about what's a sort of day in the life of a department head at the FCA look like?
So it won't surprise you to know that no day's the same, but primarily my job is to help with tricky applications. So my department assesses about over 100 a month. So I'm get involved in ones where they either have complex business models or where there's innovation and a new product or service they're offering, or where there are concerns about the business model of the individuals. So to give you kind of examples, we look at, so recently I've been concerned about phoenixing, which is a technical term that basically describes where firms might try and start up a new business when they know they've got liabilities in having to pay redress to customers. And it's how do we spot that and what do we do to try and prevent that in the market. And also we're looking at where people are trying to offer new services but don't have the right technical expertise, and that will lead to inappropriate systems and controls being put in place. Also, as with all these jobs, sit on a lot of committees looking at how we make the right regulatory judgments. And we also get involved, regulation is changing globally, and we have to also change as well as to see as things move. And so, for example, I've been sitting on the project board for when we brought in claims management companies into the perimeter of the FCA. Outside of that, there are a number of things, but probably primarily it's around people and capabilities and diversity and inclusion, kind of key areas I get involved in.
Excellent. Okay, so I think we'll probably dig into a bit more around some of those areas as we get into the expert opinion piece. But let's talk about your career more specifically. And can you give us a walkthrough and tell us what have been your highlights in your career journey to date?
Okay, so it started quite a while ago. When I left university, I was lucky enough to get on the graduate scheme of Hill Samuel Bank, which was a UK merchant bank. And that gave me a really good breadth of experience across all of the financial markets and working both on the trading floor, but also in corporate loans and loan syndication. I then went across to UBS and started on the equity side and started in corporate broking, which was fascinating because we spent time advising chairmen, chief execs and finance directors of the FTSE 350 company. Quite a lot of my sector was transport. And so I then became the specialist sales on the trading floor for the transport sector, which at the time was right in the middle of everything was being prioritised, both the railways, the buses. We were spending off time with it on airports and airlines, so it was a fascinating time. And then I made a kind of completely different move, which kind of came from a headhunter, because I hadn't thought of it, which is I went and joined what was Reuters at the time on the vendor side, looking at product strategy and marketing for the domestic equity product, selling to both the banks, the sell side, but also to the investment community on the buy side. And was at Thomson Reuters for a really long time, and but it was
we all?
I know. But it was fascinating because about every 18 months to 2 years, you got promotions and moved. So I moved from domestic equities to European equities around the time the euro came in, through to global equities, and I ended up heading up the strategy across all of the trading products. So it was a fascinating time. And then I did another completely slightly different to move, which is 4 years ago I joined the FCA and had become very interested in all of the regulation on the back of the sort of the crisis in 2008 and been very involved in how Thomson Reuters had responded to that. And so that was the move across. And I spent the first 3 years looking after prioritising the change portfolio, so looking at both the change internally and externally that the organisation was going through. And then about 18 months ago, became head of department for Authorisations.
Fantastic. I mean, that's really interesting, I think, in terms of showing the sort of twists and turns and different opportunities that present and, can make a very 360-degree view of the market that you've had.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. What would you call out as some of your most important achievements?
So probably the ones where I worked with the industry on some of the changes. So one of them would be how we displayed order books at the time we went electronic. So how do we show that? How do we actually execute those? And other one was as we moved electronic and we had that exponential growth in information coming out of that. How do we differentiate between a human trader and what they view and a machine? Even though human traders believe they can see as much as the machine. And I worked with our clients globally to create a solution that was commercial for everybody. And that was probably a really big success for me.
And I think that's, continues to be huge, this now move from humans to machines across so many industries, and it's a massive shift. So let's actually talk a little bit more about your current role, and even sort of what your team does more broadly. So your managers are responsible for the day-to-day delivery of the lending and intermediary authorisation strategy, also ensuring that the risk appetite and control frameworks are effective. So the role involves the assessment of large volumes of applications that vary in complexity. You said some of them are very tricky, and to assess and mitigate the risks in the consumer credit intermediary sector. So I guess tell us a bit about, what are the trends? Obviously, there's lots of things going on that are disruptive, et cetera, but you've got volume coming through, and different, types of products, I guess, coming to market. What are you seeing?
So we are seeing lots of different products, and some of them are really innovative and are looking at how we serve markets and consumers that haven't been served before. So we've been working closely with the industry on alternatives to high-cost credit, and looking at opportunities there. We've also seen quite a lot of artificial intelligence in machine learning about how to help decision making. So, offering advice, how do we make sure that that's built so that it can be fair to consumers, but also can identify a vulnerable customer, and rather than see the system work all the way through. The other thing on the that's all on the positive side. I think also the very low interest rates and the regulatory focus means we have to always be on the lookout for revenue streams that could pose harm to consumers.
Interesting. So is that sort of looking at financial inclusion as well as just the existing market? Like, how do you include more people in the...
Yeah, and how do we make so people that, and that's across all of it, not just in my department, but across everywhere, is how do we make sure people have access to the financial services, both in terms of socioeconomic, but also in terms of any form of disability. We're always making sure that it's fair for all consumers. And we do quite a lot in the innovation space. So we have a number of channels that help support, including our Regulatory Sandbox, which allows people to come in and test out new products and see whether they work, but also see how they fit from a regulatory point of view. And that's a key area that the FCA is very involved in.
And so that's very interesting. So the Regulatory Sandbox, that's for the industry can come in and use the sandbox, as well as how do you work with other regulators? Are they involved in that as well? Or
so it's not my area of expertise,
right?
But we do work with the other regulators, and I know that some of them have set up their own regulatory sandboxes as well. I think it's really key that there's a safe space for people to try it without, because sometimes there's that balance of the innovation versus is it treating the customers fairly?
Yeah. So obviously you mentioned AI and machine learning, and obviously there's some customers or service providers using those and making sure that they're fair. Are you using AI and machine learning as well within your area or within the FCA for other regulatory requirements?
Yes. So I think we said we have a large number of firms. So it's trying to identify where are the outliers that could pose a risk to consumers. So we've been looking at how we use technology there, how we share intelligence across the organisation. It's been worked on in many different areas. So particularly for firms or individuals, how do we make sure we share that? And also I mentioned earlier about phoenixing. It's trying to identify if someone comes back in, do we know immediately that they are someone who's been also operating in a different area?
Fantastic. Okay.
So we use it a lot. Where we've also used technology is in trying to improve the service for the firms, trying to come into the gateway. So, for example, we now have a capability called Track My Application. So similar to you have if you buy something online, you want to see how it's progressing. If you submit an application, it can then help you see how it's progressing through the assessment stage.
So improving the customer experience from your side as well. And obviously, lots of these areas that you've mentioned, whether it's the use of tech or just the way that your process and procedures are working, is really ensuring that trust is there, and trust in financial markets is absolutely key. So what else are you doing to ensure that trust is built and maintained?
So if you look at the way we assess firms, we want to have trust in the business model, so it benefits the consumer, but also the firm in that balanced way. We have to have trust that firms have the right resources, both financial and obviously skilled resources, to be successful and sustainable. We want to make sure that there's trust in the fact consumers have full transparency of all the products and services, especially the terms and conditions in those. And we need to get trust that customers are being treated fairly. So it absolutely runs through the judgments that we make.
Yeah, very, very important. That's really interesting. It sounds like there's a lot going on from an internally use of technology. Looking at how the customers and the service providers are also using technology is absolutely key. You mentioned diversity and inclusion. Can I have a little chat about what things are you doing there? What's happening within the FCA from a diversity and inclusion perspective, and you know, how important do you feel about that?
Passionately.
Yes.
So if we do an awful lot with the industry about diversity and inclusion, but internally it's a key priority, both in terms of gender, but also all other forms of diversity. And I think the really key thing is it's connected with inclusion. So it's called diversity and inclusion. And as someone who spent my life working in the wholesale financial markets, inclusion is the key part. It's not just being there, but it's having that breadth of thought and challenge. So I'm very involved in making sure we already do. So for the first time in my career, my gender is irrelevant, which is the most liberating thing. I see Kimberly nodding because I like, but it really is, and I think, and I want that inclusion for all, everybody. Everybody should be themselves at work, and I think so. We're looking at lots of different initiatives to make sure people have a voice, and we have a level playing field in how we provide opportunities and promotions and those sort of things.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it's interesting increasingly on diversity and inclusion, but also in the technology and the data and making sure that there's no biases in the data and all of those kind of areas.
And
as well.
we look at that a lot in, and that I think is one of the challenges that we're going to see in AI as well.
Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. Okay, so let's now move on to one of my favourite sections, the Rants and Revelations. Connecting, celebrating and championing women in risk, regulation and compliance, Risky Women Radio takes an intimate look at the rants and revelations of the top women shaping the debate and the industry. So, if you're thinking back on, you know, what advice you were given maybe in your career that you feel has really helped you, what would that piece of advice that you would suggest that would be useful for others?
Well, right at the beginning of my career, the best advice I got was don't pour the tea when you go to meetings, but we don't have that anymore. But that was, and someone who loves tea, I used to sit on my hands and watch it go cold. But seriously, I think the best advice that has really made a difference for me is to embrace the imposter syndrome. So we all have it, that little voice that says someone's going to come and tap you on the shoulder and say, I think we've made a mistake here, actually is what drives you to be better. And you have to find the way to balance it. So it helps you as long as it doesn't drown out all other voices. And so that's a key one for me.
Great piece of advice. I think that applies, you know, across the board to everyone at different times. So excellent. And then what's your rant? You know, what's that one thing that if you had the power to change and wave your magic wand, what would that be?
Inclusion for all.
Right.
Really is.
Perfect. All right. Our rapid fire round. Risky Women is a vibrant network at the centre of a global community in a rapidly growing, evolving and influential industry. Given the continued pace of change, our rapid fire round revisits the most pressing topics to share ideas and offer listeners new perspectives. What is your one word to describe the world of governance, risk and compliance?
Essential.
And your cure for the cost of compliance and the waves of regulatory change?
Firms treating the customer fairly at the centre of everything they do.
Back to trust, which is great. Are you optimistic, pessimistic or neutral in your outlook for the year ahead?
So I'm a natural optimist, but that's currently under pressure at the moment.
I think we've had a bit of that recently. And then a little more fun. What is a book that you would recommend that everyone reads?
I read this summer Michelle Obama's Becoming. It's absolutely inspiring, insightful, funny. She's you get a real sense of who she is and the challenges she's faced and how she's overcome them.
I actually listened to it using Audible because she reads it, which is just fantastic because you're actually getting it in her voice. So I agree. I loved that too. And something to watch.
Killing Eve, if you haven't already, go watch it.
Yes, excellent. I loved it. And your favourite podcast?
So my favourite podcast is, I don't know if you know it, it's called the Radio 5 Rugby Union podcast, which is absolutely brilliant. And I love rugby. But I love the kind of conversation that it has, and it brings in current and past players and managers, and it's a great company for me on my Sunday morning run.
Well, that's a new one for me to add to my list. So thank you very much, Sarah Hayes. It's been a pleasure talking to you on Risky Women Radio.
Thank you.
Hi, we're always looking for sponsors, and if you'd like to get involved and help celebrate and champion women in risk regulation and compliance, please get in contact at info@riskywomen.org. We'd love to have you join the show. Thank you for listening to this exciting episode of Risky Women Radio to connect, champion and celebrate women in risk regulation and compliance. I'm Kimberly Cole, based in Hong Kong. For more information on the Risky Women Global Network, head to our website in the episode notes, and please be part of the ongoing conversation by subscribing to this podcast, connecting with us at Risky Women on Twitter, or even reaching out to me directly by email.